Good morning on this Saturday. Kind of nice to walk out this morning and actually see more green in the grass. It's starting to look a little bit more like springtime. The grasses are greening up, and of course we got lots of birds, robins, and others that are showing up in our yards, and signs of spring and signs of new life. I mean, the buds are showing up on the trees, and that's one of the things of Easter as well. It's a promise of new life that, just as God raises Jesus from the dead, that we will be raised from the dead as well. Anyway, on this date, we're going to look at 1 Samuel 25 through 27. I'm going to add one chapter that would be tomorrow's reading. Tomorrow morning on Sunday, as normal, we have worship at Mabel in Sutton at 9 o'clock, not at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then at Our Savior's in McHenry at 10:30, and I'll be live at 9 o'clock from Mabel in Sutton, as normally. As we read today's lesson, it begins with now Samuel died in chapter 25, and Samuel has been a prophet for God. He's been the one that he anointed Saul king, and then with God's displeasure with Saul, Samuel also anointed David as king. So Samuel, this prophet, who had been, Samuel had been sworn to God, from before he was born by his mother. And, but Samuel was the hand of God, the instrument of God in so many different ways. But the people of Israel mourned him. And after the time of mourning, after Samuel was buried, and it says that David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man there that was a rich man, it says, and his name was Nabal, Nabal. And he was shearing his sheep, and David heard that this was happening. So he sent some of his men to this Nabal to ask if he would give some supplies, give some meat and other supplies to David and to David's army of 600 men, because David was living in their midst, and, he would, give protection and everything. And Nabal answers David's servant, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away. Why should I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have butchered and give it to men that I don't even know where they came from?" So he just, totally, he pleads in ignorance as to knowing who David is, and whether he did or didn't know David is to be seen. But I think he really probably did, and he was just pleading ignorance and just not wanting to give to David. So David's men go back and they tell David of Nabal's response, and David says, "Well, okay, put on your swords, put on your fighting clothes. We're going to go down, and since he has totally ignored us, we're going to go down and we're going to kill him and kill everybody in his camp." And again, it's what but Nabal's wife Abigail learns that David and his men are on the way, and she learns that her husband had refused to give anything to David, and so she gathers a bunch of loaves of bread, the number of, loaves of bread that, she got 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, and, what does it say, 100 clusters of raisins. And she brought a lot of food on her way to present, to give to David, to, support him, to thank him, and all of these things. She knew who David was. And they meet. David is coming to do the battle, and she's coming to meet him on the road. And she says to David, my husband is a fool, and that that's what his name means. Nabal means fool, and he was really just not thinking well at all when he refused to give you that. And so she pleads with David to take what it is that she has brought as a peace offering, as support for David and his men, And David does that. And he says to her, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your good sense, and blessed be you who have kept me today from the blood guilt of killing others." And then she goes back to Nabal, and he was holding a feast, and he was drunk, it says. So she waits till morning to talk to her husband, and she talks to him, told him of everything that happened. And it says his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck him, and he was completely dead. But, it's just, I don't really quite understand that, but it's, if God just put that punishment upon him right away that way, but, it's what it sounds like. But, of the dread and of the shame and the guilt that came from knowing and everything. But so then when David hears that Nabal has died, I got to itch my elbow, and it's this long stretch over there, sorry. He calls to Abigail, and he says that, he would take her for a wife so that he would provide for her and take care of her and everything that way. And we know, David was already married to Saul's daughter, and he had another wife as well. So, and it wasn't uncommon in this part of Israelite history for the men to have more than one wife. And we've seen that, often as we've been reading. In chapter 26, it says the Ziphites come to Saul and say that David is in the hills of this place. And so Saul rises up and goes down again to make war against David and to put David to death. It just seems to me that's Saul's purpose. It's a focus point. It's part of the madness of Saul, and part of that he just can't see anything else. But he goes out to do battle with David, Saul does. And as he is camped out and sleeping and the guards are all set, David and one of David's men, Ahimelech, I think it is, that goes with him, or Abishai, that went with David. And they go in, and this other man says, "Well, we're right here, we can kill Saul." And David says, "No." So he took Saul's sword, his spear that was in the ground beside him, and his water bucket, and they left. And they got outside of the camp up on the hill, and then David starts calling out to Saul's guard and everything. And you thought you were supposed to protect your master and everything. And again, now that Saul sees that David could easily have killed him, and Saul again relents from this quest he has to put David to death. Saul in verse 17 of chapter 26, Saul recognized David's voice. "Is that your voice, my son David?" So, he's trying to kill him, but he's calling my son David. I suppose the king would be able to call anybody son, because the king was the father of all. The king was God, in many ways as well, but not for the Israelites. The king was never supposed to be God. But, David says, "Why does my Lord pursue his servant? What have I done? What guilt is on my hands?" And so Saul, it says in verse 21, "I have done wrong. Come back, because I will never again harm you. Because my life was precious in your sight, I will also honor your life." And so Saul blesses David and gives him, he gives him his blessing, which is, the king's blessing is quite a deal. And then in verse 27, we're going to look at quickly, David says in his heart, "I will now perish by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to escape into the land of the Philistines, because then maybe Saul will give up on pursuing me." So David goes into the land of the Philistines with his men, and he asks there of the king, the ruler there, "If I have found favor in your sight, let a place be mine for me and my men, so that we may make our home here." And yeah, that's all right, he says, and they do that. David's a little bit, there's a little bit of duplicity going on here, a little bit of, carrying stuff on behind his back, because David would go and he would raid these towns within the Philistine area, and he would totally wipe them out, steal the cattle, sheep, and everything that way. And when the king would ask, where have you been doing? David would say, oh, I've been going over here in Israel. I've been going here. But, there was never any witnesses left of what David did, as he was secretly battling against the Philistines, who were living in the land promised to the Israelites.